All right, let's get started. People are still able to sign in, but they'll miss the beginning, my introduction. So hi, everybody. Welcome to our webinar today on the Asian longhorn beetle and also the emerald ash borer. My name is Rachel McCarthy, and I'm the Outreach and Education Coordinator for the First Detector program. Before we get started today, I'd like to cover a few housekeeping items. We are recording the webinar, and the link to the recording will be available on the First Detector training site, on the same place where you registered for this for the workshop today. If you have a question during the program, please use the question and answer box. If you have technical issues with your video or with your sound, you can use the chat box, and we'll be monitoring both of those through the presentation. Joining us today is Joe Boggs from The Ohio State University, and we will also have Dr. David Coyle from Clemson University. I'm talking a little bit about Asian longhorn beetle and the emerald ash borer. So I'd like to turn the floor over to Joe. Joe, if you're ready.
I'm ready. Can you hear me fine?
I can.
Okay, great.
All right,
well,
thanks so much.
Thanks a lot for everyone for attending today. Very important topics, particularly Asian longhorn beetle, but I know some of you are also dealing with emerald ash borer. So we're going to be talking a bit about both. And again, there are going to be some things that I'll move rather quickly through. This is being recorded. I want to emphasize that because, for example, some of the web addresses and so on and so forth, you can go back and take a look at those. So normally when we do these presentations, we wait till the end to give special thanks and recognize our partnerships, but I want to do it right at the very beginning. Because as you can see, in terms of Ohio and the Asian longhorn beetle partnerships, the list is very long, and these are critical partnerships. I want to highlight two people in particular. One, you've already seen the name, Dave Coyle, but also Phil Baldoff, and I saw that Phil is on today, so that's outstanding. Phil is in charge of the eradication program in Ohio for USDA APHIS PPQ, and he's also providing leadership until the end of this month for the discovery down in South Carolina. One very quick thing is that we will have time at the end for questions. So if we haven't answered questions during the presentation, we'll have a little time at the end, obviously, to be able to answer those questions. And the participants, if you do have input on some of those questions, please make sure and take that opportunity. Well, my second point is, where do we see Asian longhorn beetle in North America? Now, these are the active infestations, and they all have some things in common. First, so far, every infestation has arrived directly from Asia. And this is based on DNA analysis. So let me just go back very quickly. So our infestation in Ohio did not come from Long Island or did not come from Massachusetts. Conversely, the one in Massachusetts did not come from Mississauga, which is just outside of Toronto. These all arrive directly from Asia. That's an important point because prior to their discovery, we often will see multiple related infestations by movement of material before the infestation is discovered. So I'm going to be, Dave and I are both going to be emphasizing this need to make sure and be aware of Asian longhorn beetle, because the sooner they can be discovered, the less likely they will be moved around to new locations. Of course, that brings to bear exactly why Dave is on here. On June 4th, 2020, the Asian longhorn beetle was confirmed in Hollywood, South Carolina. So I'm going to turn it over to Dave to give a little bit of an update on that.
Thanks, everybody. Hello. Yes, we did confirm that. Actually, I think May 29th was our official date, but we do have a fairly healthy Asian longhorn beetle population down there in Hollywood, which is just south of Charleston. We are working with APHIS and our Clemson Department of Plant Industry. That's our regulatory agency here in South Carolina. We are still working to try to delimit the infestation. We're trying to find the edges. And at this point, we've found, it looks like we found one edge, but we're still working on kind of the rest of them. We are at multiple square miles of infested area at this point. This beetle has, I'm an entomologist, so I'll say it's clearly been here a few years. We have some very heavily infested trees, large trees that have been killed. We're going to have a graduate student starting here this fall. We're going to try to do some dendrochronology and figure out exactly how long it has been here. My guess is several years at least. One of the challenges we have for this particular infestation is, you can see on the map, we don't have a winter in that part of the world. You get into Ohio and the Northeast and everything, you've got a real winter where everything shuts down. This part of South Carolina is growing zone 8B or 9 even. It's kind of right on the edge there. So there could be winters where we barely get below 50, and I really think the beetle probably just keeps ripping through generations at that point. And I'm fairly confident in saying that this beetle has more than one generation per year in this climate. It gets extremely warm here. If you've not been, it's already been in the upper 90s or 100s for multiple days already. That's Fahrenheit. So we've got a lot of degree day accumulation very quickly. And even in my trips, I've been going on every week since early June. I've seen all sorts of life stages present, from feeding adults to egg niche creation to mating adults to extracted eggs. There's evidence of frass. So, there's all sorts of stuff happening kind of all the time down there as far as the generations. One challenge that we're going to have in this infestation is when we start cutting trees to eradicate. The environment where it's established is extremely diverse, both ecologically and socioeconomically. It was first found in a very upscale, affluent, coastal, gated golf course community. It is all over that thing. But then right across the road, you have swampland, basically. It's going to be incredibly challenging to get tree removal be done in those swamps. It's just not something where you can drive a tree removal machine in there and make it happen. So, we've got all sorts of issues we're going to have to figure out there as well. People ask, how did it get there? I'm going to be honest, we'll probably never know. This particular area is, 15 miles from the Port of Charleston. It's about 70 miles from the Port of Savannah, which is a massive port in terms of shipping volume coming in. There's a railroad that goes through the area. There's an RV park right up the road. It's a huge vacation spot from a lot of people in northern climates. I mean, Highway I-95 and Highway 17, which are very close to there, those, 17 runs from Charleston to Hilton Head to Savannah. It's a very heavily traveled, popular destination. So, at this point, we don't know how it got there, and we may never know. So that's the update. It's there, it's hopping. Every week I've been down there, I've been able to catch live adults in the tree, which all the folks from Ohio say is fairly rare. So we've got a good, healthy population. And, as we know more, we will update folks.
Dave, I really appreciate that. And I want everyone to hear two things. Number one is every time Asian longhorn beetle is found in a new location, and I'm going to be kind of using our infestation in Ohio as a bit of a case study, but every time it's been found in a new location, there has been something new learned about the beetle. And so, I'm looking forward, in a little while, Dave will be doing this exact same thing that we're doing today, providing, though, what's learned in South Carolina. Thanks a lot, Dave, for that update. Now, there is one common goal, though, and we're going to really emphasize this even more so later on. The goal is eradication, is to get to totally eliminate. Eradication means there's no part of the beetle's life cycle available, from eggs to adult. They're gone. And that's a pretty, that is a pretty substantial yardstick to achieve. Now, one thing I'll be honest, I kind of wish we had this opportunity in Ohio, but Dave has a very special, eradication tool there in South Carolina. So I want to emphasize that, again, things are done a little differently all over. That one's for you, Dave. But I do want to emphasize the success. Now, for Phil Baldoff on here, for example, he'll recognize, because we've done teaching together, that I used to just have individual dots. I've expanded, and this isn't even entirely accurate. All these black and green flashing dots are where Asian longhorn beetle has been successfully eradicated. And you see this grape-like cluster around Chicago, for example. Well, there were 7 infestations there. They were spread across an area. So this wasn't one spot. So that's why I've changed this graphic a little bit, just to emphasize that there has been success. That success has bred a considerable amount of experience, and that's to our favor. Again, we have the USDA APHIS PPQ experienced in all of these infestations, and also, in contact with Canada to learn what they're doing and vice versa. So it's not like that each infestation is an island unto itself, and that's very important. Emerald ash borer, I hate to say this, but pretty much we've had to throw in the towel. It is widespread, often dense infestations, and eradication just simply is not possible. So getting to the Ohio infestation, again, just kind of as a bit of a case study here, this dot isn't the size of the infestation. This dot's just showing an Ohio map where it was found, where it was first announced June 17th, 2011. I'm going to zoom in a little bit, and I want you to notice there are going to be some little dots moving. Now, what am I showing here? Well, I'm showing, for example, what I said earlier, that before these infestations are discovered, sometimes materials are moved around. Again, it's no one's fault. We didn't even know it was there. So some wood was moved from the infestation to Monroe Township next door. And then a gentleman was allowed to take down a tree that was dying. He took it down for firewood, and that was, again, at the time, okay. But this led to these satellite infestations, once again, emphasizing single points of introduction, then multiple infestations in a region when materials are moved around. But here's some good news. If you take a look at this quarantine map and map depicting these different infestations, March 2018, September 2018, those satellite infestations were declared eradicated. Once again, eradication has been successful, and once again, experience gained through eradication can be applied elsewhere. Of course, we still have a sizable quarantine area, which brings up a point. If you do have ALB, there's going to be specific strategies applied. First, quarantine and regulatory. Let's not move it around. As Dave indicated, survey and detection. Where is it? Third is tree removal, infested tree removal and destruction. And then we, of course, obviously want to do what we're doing today, public outreach. This last point, research, and Dave and I have been talking about this a little bit. I have to tell you that from my perspective, with Dave being involved down there in South Carolina, with Clemson being involved, there's opportunities in each case to learn more about this beetle through research. USDA has its own research arm, and they've really done some great work teaching us more and more about this beetle, and the same thing will apply in South Carolina. So how did it get to Ohio? Dave brought up that point. Well, we don't know how it exactly got to South Carolina. Of course, we with Ohio State, we have some theories. I mean, I'm not saying that this was a definitive, but we don't open boxes from Michigan. Seriously, how did it get here? Just to emphasis, this is a wood-boring insect. Wood can be converted into pallets with the beetle in it in Asia. Those pallets then can be loaded onto ships and containers. Just use your imagination, for example. Then those containers are offloaded onto trains, as Dave indicated, on the trucks. These are USDA APHIS shots of pallets where a pupa was dug out of the pallets here in the United States. So that's how it can arrive here. Presumably, it's also how it could possibly spread. So we want to make sure and be aware of this. Move through wood. There were a few firsts in Ohio, and I bring this up because there are going to be some firsts in South Carolina, many firsts in South Carolina. But this was pretty important because until Ohio's infestation was found, every other infestation was connected to some type of a transportation hub. As Dave mentioned, Savannah, Georgia, a major port. In all cases elsewhere, that's been the situation. In our case, though, as you can see from this map, this was farmland, farms and forests. It was also an area with a lot of firewood producers. Now, I want to say this. USDA, APHIS, and the Ohio Department of Agriculture, they do work with individuals who are producing firewood to make sure that if they continue to do so, they're doing so safely. They're doing so, with being monitored and trained and so on. These are called compliance agreements. So It isn't to say that all the firewood producers were shut down. However, it is to say that they were part of a program where makes it, so that the beetle won't be moved around. Another first in Ohio. Now, this is a first, I should need to emphasize, this is the first where it was recognized that these beetles were overlapping. As a matter of fact, they probably overlapped in Chicago, but at the time, we did not know that emerald ash borer was in that area of Chicago. Also, there's little doubt that they overlapped in Toronto, but again, for the same reason, we didn't realize where emerald ash borer was. But in Ohio, it's definite that they overlapped. This isn't a posed photograph. I mean, the only thing I did was picked up the piece of the wood there on the left with the ALB oviposition pits and leaned it against these serpentine larval galleries on the wood in the background. That's all I did. These were literally side by side. Here we have what was called a marshalling yard. You're going to learn about this in just a minute. That these were infested trees. They get ground down. But look in the background. You had ash trees dying from Asian longhorn beetles. So ALB infested trees dying from emerald ash borer. Here's a tub grinder for grinding up that material, the infested ALB infested material. In the background, you'll see trees being killed by Asian longhorn beetle. The overlapping then created quite a bit of confusion. We did a very good job, I think, we collectively, not just Extension and not just Ohio State, but collectively, the Ohio Department of Agriculture, others, in teaching people about emerald ash borer. But as a result, then we started having a lot of individuals applying what they knew about emerald ash borer to Asian longhorn beetle. Well, and that presents a problem, because other than being tree killers, there's different than apples to oranges. And that's an issue. And that's something we need to all be aware of. And it's why I'm combining these two beetles in this presentation, so that we can do a little comparing and contrasting. For example, size matters with these beetles. Asian longhorn beetle is a big beetle. You're going to see this image again. That's my hand with a penny. And this is a male. Males have longer antennae, and typically males aren't quite as big as a female. So you can see this is a big beetle. And you see the penny there. Look at emerald ash borer. I mean, you can put it on a penny. Big difference. And by the way, just very quick note, and I'm not going to go too much detail about this. This also has to do with energy expenditure. Emerald ash borer is a smaller beetle. When it flies, it can make use of a lot of aerodynamics, including just wind movement, that saves energy. When Asian longhorn beetle flies, it expends a lot of energy. Now, I'm making that point not to say that Asian longhorn beetle won't fly. It's a very good flyer, but the fact of the matter is, if it does fly and burns energy, then it has to replace that. If it's a female, then she has to do something if she expends too much energy relative to maturing her eggs. That's an important point. Size does matter. And of course, the exit holes matter. You have these very distinct round exit holes with Asian longhorn beetle, emerald ash borer, D-shaped. That's because, let me go back. This beetle, this is a buprested, and the genus is Agralis. And Agralis beetles have flat backs and round bellies when viewed head on. So they come out of these exit holes head on, and they really can't help but make a D-shaped emergence hole. Also, Asian longhorn beetle can be found anywhere on the tree. This came as a complete surprise to me, frankly, where I'd be standing there looking way up in the tree like I was looking for emerald ash borer, and then look down at my feet and here's an exit hole. It can be anywhere on the tree, whereas emerald ash borer tends to have a pattern with each successive generation. It typically goes top down and outside in. So each year, each generation is kind of moving down. So by the time you see the D-shaped holes at eye level, you have a tree that's pretty well completely destroyed. It's been completely infested. What are the most serious challenges, though, with managing these borers? And this is very important in terms of people comparing the two or thinking the two are the same. Well, the first challenge is these are non-native beetles. None of our native trees have any defense against these non-native beetles. They didn't co-evolve together. So for example, emerald ash borer, why it's so destructive to our native ash trees did not evolve a defense mechanism. The same with Asian longhorn beetle. So that's one part. They will attack healthy trees as well as stressed and dying trees. Our native borers do not attack healthy native trees. Now let that sink in a little bit, because that's something that if they did, if you think about it, common sense wise, if you think about it, if they attacked healthy native trees, we wouldn't be talking about them. They would have killed their hosts. So trees do evolve a defense against those things that are feeding and boring into them. In this case, that just didn't happen. The other challenge is there's no management strategy for Asian longhorn beetle. There are management options for emerald ash borer. But with Asian longhorn beetle, once again, it's eradication. We cannot let this beetle go the same way as emerald ash borer. So let's talk a bit about their tree killing behavior to do even more comparing, contrasting. But I have to have a little short segue here to get us into this. We're going to do a little review, and this is a review on stem anatomy of trees and function, just some basics. And again, everyone listening, this is going to no doubt be just a review, but it's important that we're all on the same page. So we're going to look down on a tree trunk, just like looking down on this cut stump. This is the orientation. And as you all know, you have the bark to the outside, then you have this ring of phloem, then you have this very thin, in fact, this is not the right size for the cambium. It's only about 3 or 4 cell layers thick. If you pull off the bark and phloem, it's that slimy stuff basically on the surface of the xylem. The phloem, and the way we remember this, probably we're taught this in school at some point, food flows through phloem. So carbohydrates produced through photosynthesis in the leaves flow down and get stored in the tree. Then the reverse can occur. They can flow up. So food flows through phloem. The xylem provides structural support for the tree. It is the wood of the tree. It's what we make wood out of, except when it's rotted away or if Asian longhorn beetle larvae bore through it. But let's drill down on the xylem a little more. In the center, you have pith. Then you have heartwood. This is basically non-functional material for the tree other than structural integrity. And then we have this sapwood. And what does the sapwood do? Well, water and nutrients flow up one direction, the tree through the sapwood of the xylem. But all trees are not equal. Now, I'm painting with a very broad brush. There are some trees that are, semi-diffuse porous, and then there are some trees, as I'm going to mention it, semi-ring porous. But in general, we can divide some trees into these diffuse porous trees where you have multiple annual rings that are functional. That includes maples. And then we have this other group of trees called ring porous, where only the most recent ring is functional as sapwood. And that would include things like ash. So that's some basics there. But what about these cambial cells, where they're a little bit like teenagers. They don't know what they're going to be till they grow up, but they can grow up to become phloem to the outside or xylem to the inside. That's how trees increase girth. Now they're called meristematic cells because they're undifferentiated. And you can think of other places on trees where you see meristematic cells, like in the buds or down to tips of the roots. But notice the direction of these arrows. What happens though if a tree is wounded? Now you notice I've changed the direction of arrows towards the wound. Those cambial cells then can give rise to meristematic callus tissue. This is what it looks like in real life. And then eventually that tissue will become organized wound wood. So wound wood is not organized, or is organized. It is not meristematic, but notice how it kind of looks lip-like and sort of swollen there at the edge of this wounded area. As Alex Shigo said, very well, in my opinion, trees do not heal, they seal. So this is the effort to seal up the wounds. Now, if we take a look at emerald ash borer, you notice the wounding is the phloem. The larvae feed on the phloem, so there's the larva actually feeding on the phloem. And then they etch into that first ring of the xylem. The tree does respond by producing callus tissue and then wound wood. And that leads to bark splitting, bark cracking. If we pull this bark off, you can see there's that wound wood. And you can see the evidence of emerald ash borer beneath that. This is a good signature for wood boring insects, by the way. The same thing applies for Asian longhorn beetle. There's the adult and there's the larva. The larva, they can feed on the phloem. The destruction they do will stimulate the cambium to produce wound wood, and you get bark splitting. And once again, there's the wound wood. Here's some other examples. These are actually taken from, oops, sorry, I went back too far. These are actually taken from the area of infestation in Ohio. And you can see this bark cracking, very evident little frass down inside of that. Now, since trees will respond to wounding, what happens with the holes the adults create when they emerge? Well, they do get closed. It's a wound in the tree. And you can see this very evident closure of the wound. Look at it face on. And that then leads to another type of symptom where you get these kind of puckered areas. And that's where the exit holes, if the tree is actively functioning and still relatively healthy, this can occur in one season. Other borers, again, I want to emphasize, you can have bark cracking for the same reason. This is actually a flat-headed apple tree borer, not a very good name because it loves to pick on any stressed maple tree, for example. It's a native borer going after native stressed, in this case, red maples. And of course, you see that same type of symptomology. All right. These are outright tree killers. So now we're going to talk very straightforwardly about each one of these and how they do kill the tree. So emerald ash borer, an Agralis in the Agralis genus, native to China, Siberia, the Koreas, and Japan. And I kind of had this map sort of as an overview before, but these individual dots represent where there has been a find, not the size of the infestation, but once again, widespread infestations, multiple dense infestations. Eradication is simply not realistic. Now, emerald ash borer only kills trees in one genus. You're probably thinking, well, wait a second, Joe, I read about this white fringe tree. You know, why do they occur in white fringe tree? Is that meaning it's changing its host? No, white fringe tree belongs to the olive family, Oleaceae, as do the ash trees. And genetically, so if you look at the DNA between these, white fringe tree is actually the closest relative found in the US to our native ash tree. So they're very, very close genetically. However, this is just outside of Dayton, Ohio. This is where some of the studies were done on this, situation. And in this white fringe tree, there were about 3 D-shaped holes. This was 2014. If you look in the background, there are dead ash. So this tree was really tested by emerald ash borer. However, 2017, looking fantastic. And as a matter of fact, I just took pictures of this last week. I should have added, but at the end, you wouldn't even know that emerald ash borer ever picked on this white fringe tree. What's the take-home message? The take-home message is emerald ash borer really only kills trees belonging to the genus Fraxinus, and only North American trees that belong to the genus Fraxinus. They haven't expanded their host. But again, healthy as well as stressed trees, very important. So how do they kill trees? Well, again, looking at that cross-section, remember ash is a ring porous tree. Emerald ash borer is very indiscriminate in its egg laying. You can see there's the ovipositor, and she's just indiscriminately laying eggs all over the outside of the bark. Those eggs hatch, and notice what just happened here. The larvae are feeding on the phloem. These are phloem feeders. They're not cambium feeders. Yes, they will consume that little slurry, but they do not just make a living on cambium. They're after that sugar and nutrient-rich phloem. But as they increase their size, their girth, they cannot help but start etching. And if you take a look at this shot that I took in Warren County, Ohio, the eggs actually hatched way over. The egg actually hatched way up here. As that larva increased in girth, it started etching that first ring of xylem. And of course, I think you can probably guess what happens because of that. Also, because they are phloem feeders, woodpeckers make very shallow holes and they really get carried away. You'll see a lot of this blonding on the bark where they're pulling off the bark scales. So I think you know where this is heading. Eventually, the entire plumbing is just totally destroyed. And this can happen rather quickly. Of course, it's population dynamics related. If you have a high population, much quicker. I wish I'd taken a close-up. This tree actually had very good growth rates before you start seeing this thinning canopy. So if you looked at the individual growth rates, it was just trucking along very good until emerald ash borer showed up. In this case, it was almost a mass attack because the localized population was very high. It didn't go slow. And this leads to something we've observed in Ohio and Michigan and elsewhere. When you have high populations, we call it like a synchronized death. The trees go down very rapidly. However, trees can be protected with insecticides. Very effective. The research time and again has shown this to be true. The goal, though, is to maintain full canopies, not to kill every emerald ash borer. A canopy, as long as it's full, you could still have 5 or 10% infestation, as long as no one notices it, and we actually see that occurring. It doesn't have to be perfect. As we all know, insecticides seldom present 100% mortality. But this is not eradication. So it turns out the phloem is a very effective transport for our systemic insecticides, not just the neonicotinoids, but also imamectin benzoate and some other insecticides. They do very well in the phloem, and they really do well against phloem-feeding insects. By the way, that includes things like sucking insects like aphids and soft scales. So we apply a systemic insecticide. We can pour it around the base of the tree. We can inject into the soil. We can inject directly into the tree. That systemic insecticide then goes into the phloem, protects the phloem, also up into the leaves. It will kill emerald ash borer that are feeding on the leaves. You have nice ash trees because of the treatment. And you can go online and read all about in this 3rd edition of insecticide options for protecting ash trees from emerald ash borer. Here is the web address, just emeraldashborer.info, one word. And this is a very handy resource. But you can't wait till ash trees look like this. Why is that? Because where do the larvae feed? They feed on the phloem. Where do we want the systemic insecticides to go? Into the phloem. So if you wait till trees look like this, the phloem will not be functional, will not translocate the systemic insecticide. You'll just end up with ash holes. You know, we've lost almost all the ash in Ohio. I love teaching about emerald ash borer because it was so much fun. All right, so we're going to finish talking about Asian longhorn beetle, a very, very serious insect. Asian longhorn beetles belong to the family Cerambycidae. Collectively, they are often referred to as longhorn beetles because of these long antennae. Asian longhorn beetle is a huge beetle. It's going to be one of the larger beetles you'll ever see in the United States. I mean, the only other beetles that come close in size predominantly are other Cerambycids. And it's a very unusual beetle in terms of colors. You have this black, this kind of shiny black with these indistinct white markings. You know, one common name in China, I understand, is a starry night beetle. Yeah, these little kind of bluish markings. It is a huge beetle. Here's a colleague of mine, Eric Draper, trying to get a male down out of the tree, but the females are even bigger. Look at that. Again, this is serious, but it's okay to have a little humor. That's my hand. Once again, this is a big beetle. That's a male. Now, the larvae of Cerambycids or longhorn beetles are called round-headed borers. And that's not because of the head. By the way, here's the head right here. It's because of this large first thoracic segment, which you can really see even better in early instars. Later on, you know, the larvae are, well, they look a little bit like Michelin men. Oops, they look a little bit like Michelin men. How about the host range? Why is it so important for us to stop Asian longhorn beetles? As a matter of fact, why is it that I can say if Asian longhorn beetle were to go the route of emerald ash borer, it would be the most destructive tree killer, non-native tree killer to ever arrive in the US. And you're probably sitting there thinking, wait a second, Joe, emerald ash borer is pretty bad. Yes, but it only kills trees in the genus Fraxinus. How about Dutch elm disease? Well, ulmus. I grew up in West Virginia, so what about the extreme loss of our chestnuts to chestnut blight? Again, one species. If we take a look at Asian longhorn beetle, the very good hosts all maples, folks. Now, the data that I'm going to present here was collected in Ohio. And so I do have these maples pretty much listed, you know, most to least. And you'll see that 98% of the trees found infested in Ohio were maples, with red maples leading the pack. But then horse chestnuts, aesculus, alms, almus, willows, salix, and then other hosts. And by the way, don't be misled by this other hosts idea. In China, poplar is one of the most preferred hosts, but they're non-native poplars planted in plantations. They're actually North American poplars. So the reverse is true. Bring in a non-native host to China and the native Asian longhorn beetle just cleans up on them. The big point to this, though, is this is 12 tree genera. Now, the eradication programs, we refer to these as high-risk trees. Why is that? Because even though maples are by far the most preferred host, golden rain tree, mountain ash, has demonstrated that the beetle can develop from egg to adult on these other hosts. So they're all called high risk, meaning because they can all keep the population going. Remember what eradication is about, is the complete elimination of the beetle. 9 plant families. Now, you know, I do want to point something out, and this is something Dave and I have discussed. One thing in South Carolina that may or may not happen, and I want you all to be aware of this. These are the known hosts of an insect that does target a wide range of almost non-related trees, different families. You may know this, maples are recently placed in the Sapinaceae family, which also includes golden rain trees. And there are some southern trees that are very closely related to golden rain trees, the soap trees. And so my point is we may see some other hosts highlighted in South Carolina. Maybe not, I don't want to plant too many seeds, but that's going to be investigated because of a new location with the beetles being presented with possibly other hosts. How about their tree killing behavior? Well, what exactly does ALB do to trees? Once again, to reemphasize, they love maples. If you're on the lookout for Asian longhorn beetle, maples are going to be the trees you want to look at first. And again, healthy trees as well as stress trees. But let's start by recognizing and kind of reminding each other that maples are diffuse porous. So the adults find the trees, they lay their eggs, but it's the larva that actually tunnels in and causes the damage. Now notice something that's very different right off the bat compared to emerald ash borer. Asian longhorn beetle females lay their eggs right on the surface of the xylem. This female, I timed her 18 minutes to chew through the bark, through the phloem, through this little slurry of cambial tissue to lay a single egg onto the bark. Now, as she's doing that, she creates these pits that we call oviposition pits. You can even see the chew marks along the edge. Each one of these has a single egg in it. By the way, if you saw this on a tree, that tree would be considered infested because there is an egg in there. And there's the egg, about the size of rice, a piece of maybe long grain rice compared to a quarter, on the surface of the xylem. Now, that means when those eggs hatch, the larvae can do a couple things. Here is a first instar larva, Asian longhorn beetle. This is the phloem surrounding it. It could tunnel a bit in the phloem and then turn into the xylem. Or it might just turn into the xylem without feeding on the phloem. Eventually, it will end up in the xylem, though. Eventually, this beetle, the larvae of this beetle, will be boring in the xylem. This is what it looks like in real life. And because they're in the xylem, we see these very deep, this is unusual. I've never seen anything like this before. These very deep woodpecker holes on a healthy tree. Now, this is a silver maple, but notice this branch was fully leafed out. You know, our native woodpeckers, we typically, well, remember, we don't have borers attacking healthy native trees, so we just don't typically see this. We see woodpeckers on dying branches, dead branches, because that's where the borers are attacking the tree. But this was on a healthy looking tree, these very deep woodpecker holes. So eventually this is what it looks like. You get some damage to the phloem, you get a lot of damage in here to the xylem, except notice what's still happening on a diffuse porous tree. You still have water and nutrient transport. That's what it looks like in real life with a larva. However, because the xylem is being tunneled, you're starting to have the weakening of structural integrity, and that leads to branch breakage. This was actually taken by the Ohio ALB Cooperative Eradication Program, where the top of this tree broke off due to ALB tunneling, and it happened just before they could get the tree down. But again, a very dramatic demonstration of what happens there with a loss of structural integrity. But the take-home message is this. We did a very good job of teaching everyone that a thinning canopy was the way to find emerald ash borer. It's not a reliable diagnostic symptom for detecting ALB. Forget thinning canopies. You're not going to look for this. As a matter of fact, this was taken in Worcester, Massachusetts. This tree was right in the middle of the infested area. Hang on for a second. Excuse me. Now you can see the canopy is just starting to thin. However, take a look at this tree. It is just shot full of holes, ALB emergence holes. And then when it's taken down, take a look at the individual branches. Look at the ends of these branches. This was a live maple tree, just completely tunneled out. Now, folks, we don't have native borers that will do this to a maple tree. If we would see this in a maple tree with a native borer, these branches would be, again, dying or dead. This was a live tree. And I do want to stress that many of the ALB infestations in the United States, I'm trying to think if any were first detected, but I can't. Well, our satellite infestation, for example, one of our satellite infestations was discovered because of branch breakage, unusual branch breakage. Other infestations were expanded because of the discovery of branch breakage. I'm talking about a light wind and you have branches coming down that really shouldn't have come down. When I teach this to arborists, I always tell them, look, if you go out after wind damage or snow load damage or ice damage, take a look at the ends of the branches that came off the trees. And if those branches were alive and you see this kind of boring activity on a maple, we'd want to know about it. So then what should you be looking for? This is just basically a summary on heavily infested trees. I've probably said it enough. Branch breakage, a very, very good symptom for finding Asian longhorn beetle because it is eventually going to happen. Unlike emerald ash borer, which, by the way, again, only feeds on the phloem. We don't see trees breaking until that tree is dead. Bark splitting, that will indicate, that's one indicator of borer. And you can see these shots. Holes, very definite round holes. Because they extend into the xylem, we call this the pencil test. You can stick the pencil into the hole. Here's a cross section. You can see a pencil into where the beetle has emerged from this wood. But again, remember those holes in a healthy tree can eventually, through wound closure, close up. So you'd be wanting to look for evidence of these round puckered areas where the wound has closed up. Woodpecker damage. You know, we did an early fact sheet on the Asian longhorn beetle and really debated about adding this. And I'm now convinced it's a pretty good thing that we should be considering, this unusual woodpecker activity. Now, these can be hard to see. The pits, you really have to look closely to see these, but they can be seen. Again, this is because of the females chewing these pits to lay a single egg. On the smooth bark of a maple at certain times of the year, early in the summer, well, just not long after emergence, when you're still getting some sap flow, you can get some flow. Later in the season, you can also see some flow, but again, these pits are going to close quicker than the emergence holes. Frass, Dave mentioned frass, this kind of excelsior-like material. Frankly, you only see that usually with great evidence on a heavily infested tree. The beetles themselves, you know, you can have a fairly heavy infestation without seeing too many beetles. Dave mentioned that they're seeing a lot of beetles down there. Only conversely, the Massachusetts infestation in Worcester, Massachusetts was discovered by a homeowner who had all these big beetles in her backyard. So this can serve as an indicator. The larvae, I do want to plant a cautionary note here. We do have native longhorn beetles that have larvae that look just like this. Asian longhorn beetle is going to be found in live material, dying material. It could be found in dead material, but not very long. Remember, the adults will not select dead material. But if you do find a larva that looks like this in a tree that's on the ground and well rotted, that's not going to be Asian longhorn beetle. Our message to the public has always been and continues to be, report all suspicious beetles or tree symptoms. Now, I'm going to be giving this number out a couple different times, and I'm also going to give you another option for reporting, but 855-252-6450. 855-252-6450. That is the main number of the hotline for reporting Asian longhorn beetle and all suspicious beetles or tree symptoms. Remember, so far, now we don't know for sure about the South Carolina infestation, but these other so far relatively small, distinct infestations, I want to stress again, eradication has been successful. You know, we're thrilled with that, frankly. However, early detection is essential in terms of time and money. The longer the beetle is allowed to expand on its own, the greater the cost for eradication, as you might imagine. So the earlier the better. Earlier also not just in terms of time and money, but also reducing risk of spread. So eradication has been successful, but it does require a 100% control. And this is just anticipating what we always get asked questions about the role of insecticides. So let me talk about that very briefly. For reasons that we still do not clearly understand, and we knew this before Asian longhorn beetle was found in the United States, our systemic insecticides do not do well in terms of killing things that are in the xylem. They will kill things that are in the phloem, but not the xylem. And again, we really don't understand why that's the case. So this entire red area is xylem, and there is a larva in here, and it's not going to be killed if we treated this tree. So this larva will not be killed. This is a late instar larva. I think it's about to pupate. Even if we treated this tree, it would still turn into an adult, it would still emerge. So we say insecticides for ALB are problematic. However, and this goes back to this whole flight thing, this goes back to this idea of energy, and that is that Asian longhorn beetles have very powerful mandibles. The females will occasionally, and I don't know the percentage. I actually should ask and know, okay, how, what's the percentage? Is it 80%? Is it 50%? No doubt if a beetle has been moving a lot, they probably have to do this even more likely. There is evidence, though, that sometimes the females don't need to do maturation feeding. And what that means is, in order to mature their eggs, what you're seeing here is they will strip the bark off and they will consume the phloem. Well, if we're using a systemic insecticide, what else are they going to consume? So as a matter of fact, systemic insecticides may be consumed by the adult females during maturation feeding. But an important note is that studies done in China, and of course that's a place where we can actually have check trees, show that the efficacy is not 100%. It ranged from 50 to 90%. Is that good enough for eradication? No, it isn't. But imidacloprid, for example, the only insecticide that has been labeled for Asian longhorn beetle use, it is used in conjunction with other tools. It can be used, 50% is better than 0%. So we don't want to come away, we don't want you coming away saying, well, insecticides are never used. No, they are. They're used as an added barrier. They're used outside the infested area just to make sure that the beetles are not moving. So what are these other eradication tools? Well, it's cutting and destroying infested trees. It's the chainsaw. Trees are taken down, stumps are ground or destroyed by herbicide applications. That tree that's been cut is brought back to a marshalling yard. This is a tub grinder, converting it into a dimension of no more than 1 inch in 2 dimensions. Once again, our message is report all suspicious beetles or tree symptoms. Early detection is essential in terms of time and money. And you can go to this website. Actually, the website is, I don't have the web address, it's a little too long, but if you Google USDA Asian longhorn beetle, you will get this website. The phone number is also to the same, to USDA APHIS. And you can see on here is a button you can press to report it. Also, our hosts, First Detectors. I've done a wonderful job producing a website where if you just go to firstdetector.org, look at this. I mean, this is on the main entrance point, report. And if you click on that, up pops this very nice reporting mechanism. Now, why I want to bring this to your attention is that the Asian longhorn beetle reporting site is for Asian longhorn beetle. Notice right up here, search for a species. So some of you may be in states where emerald ash borer is still moving through and you still need to report it. We don't need to report it, for example, in Ohio, it's throughout the state. So you can click this drop down menu and you can, with using First Detectors, also report emerald ash borer. A very handy tool. I cut off the bottom, but there's a lot more to it. You can, of course, include images, also map locations and so on and so forth. But back to Asian longhorn beetle. Report what you're seeing, even if you're suspicious, even if you're just not at all sure, because no ALB investigation is a waste of time. Phil Baldoff is on here and he will tell you that right off the bat. It's not a waste of time. There's no embarrassment. There's no punishment, because it's always better to investigate a report that's not ALB than not receive a report that is ALB. And that brings us to the end of the PowerPoint presentation. I'm going to stop sharing. And I think we can have some time for some questions.
Thanks so much, Joe and Dave. We do have a couple of questions that have come in. Do you want me to read them? Can you pull up the question and answer box? We have some questions in the question and answer, and we also have a couple of questions and comments in the chat.
All right. And Dave, are you still on there too? Did I lose you, or did?
I know, man, I'm here.
Oh, good. You didn't well, you muted yourself and no snoring happened, right?
Not that you know of.
All right. I'll take the first one. And I don't know if you can, I don't know.
People cannot see them and in the question, I don't believe. So if you could just read
okay.
them
I will read
everybody.
the question. I'll read it to everybody. But I don't know if you can unmute Phil Baldoff. That may be in case he wants to kick in on any of this. The question I'm going to read, I first learned about ALB in the 1980s. When was it first discovered in the U.S.? Why has it not spread rapidly like other invasive species? Outstanding question from Maria Schreibel. Well, it was first actually found in Brooklyn in 1996. So you weren't far off. 1996, Brooklyn, New York. Why is it not spread as rapidly? Well, I think that has to do with two things. Number one, as I mentioned, this beetle can fly. It's a good flyer, but it tends to stay on its host tree, at least so far. Now, things may change in South Carolina. I don't know. Again, we're continuing to learn about this, but with emerald ash borer, the thing that I noticed right off the bat is when you went out to a tree that was heavily infested with emerald ash borer and the beetles were out, I mean, they fly like wasps, and there's nothing that stops them from just zipping off a tree going to parts unknown. We would find infested trees in Ohio, in a single ash tree out in the middle of cornfields that were, hundreds and hundreds of acres, just one big ash. Whereas Asian longhorn beetle, they tend to be more focused. And I think that may have to do with how rapidly they may distribute as adults. The other is this idea that they just lay a single egg, whereas with emerald ash borer, that female lays all of her eggs indiscriminately, so they spend a lot of time with a single egg. That tends then not to make population dynamics the same for the two insects. Can you so the Doug is asking, he was told, and Dave, I'll let you or Phil. I
Yeah.
saw yeah, can you see that?
Yep. So Doug Gaskell, he just, I hope he's still on. He asked if he said, I was told the South Carolina population is identical to the Ohio population based on DNA testing. Is that correct? That is correct, but I will also say that does not completely implicate Ohio. Now, I realize that Ohio State is 0-4 all-time versus Clemson in football, but I'm not.
No, wait a minute. Well, let's stop this
I'm
right
not
now.
prepared to throw them under the bus because it could have just as easily come from that same population in China. I think I mentioned, as far as invasive species, this particular area checks every possible box, right? You've got major ports, you've got lots of tourism traffic, you've got a railroad, you've got an RV park. We don't know where it came from yet. So but yes, it does match the Ohio population, but that does not mean it is from there.
Yeah, and that is I appreciate that, Dave. And yes, and you did have to get that Clemson OSU thing in there, didn't you? I was hoping I wouldn't hear that. I tell you. Yeah, remember something about the DNA testing. When we learned that there were these different markers, you might say, in China, so slightly different DNA, you have to first, how can that happen? So when we say, an insect is from China or from Asia, we're talking about a huge region, a huge area. But for the beetles to be slightly different with their DNA, they have to have a geographic distribution that sets them apart so they're not interbreeding. So if you look at where these different DNA signatures are located in Asia, they're very big regions. It's not just like we can say Beijing, that's one, and then just down the road 20 miles, that's another. So it very well could be, that they just came from the same spot in Asia. And now we know that. We always kind of expected that might happen anyway. Sharon Coleman's asking, Sharon, she's asking about getting specimens, ALB and EAB specimens for teaching. Sharon, I do not know the answer to that.
I can chime in there.
Oh, good.
This is Rachel.
Mm-hmm.
Sharon, I know that in the past, although I haven't needed them in quite some time because I have quite a stash in my freezer downstairs, but there's a quarantine lab at Cornell University and Hayek's lab, and she has been very generous with allowing me to take adults that are, dead, and then I freeze them. And that's what I've used with my outreach programs. So she is a person to contact.
Outstanding, Rachel. Thank you. It's a great question. I'm going over to the chat now. Do we have any? We don't have any more.
One thing I put in that chat, you'd said you can Google that Asian longhorn beetle aphis. If you just put in asianlonghornbeetle.com, it directs you right over to their webpage.
Oh, thank you, Dave. Outstanding. Yep. Outstanding. Okay. So Steve Long, does ALB only feed on dead dying wood material where it is native? Well, and Dave, you can answer this and kick in on this. My understanding is, remember, if we're going to apply what ALB would do on its native trees in Asia, it's not just dead dying, it's also stressed. So if we apply that here, for example, and let's say ambrosia beetles, because we have a number of native ambrosia beetles, we know, for example, in North America that those beetles and bark beetles, those beetles are hitting trees that may, to our eyes, look perfectly okay, but they are stressed. When a tree becomes stressed, one of the very first things it can do is, as I just drops its defenses. It starts shifting over into other things. But the point being is that it's no longer as protected as it was. So, yes, assuming that Asian longhorn beetle has grown up with its hosts in China, it would be stressed and dying, but not dead. I want everybody to get that. The beetle gets moved around when it ends up in a tree in the xylem, in wood, that gets converted to dead. And by the way, very quick note on all these wood borers, Once that occurs and the moisture level for that wood starts dropping, that actually extends the developmental time for the larva because they're not able to get all of the resources that they need. So it's kind of like saying, look, this would be great if they would emerge on the ship. But once you're converted into a pilot and loaded on the ship and that wood starts drying down, it extends the developmental time. Conversely, what would you do to that pallet to try to eliminate any possibility? Kiln drying, heat treatments, and theoretically that's supposed to continue to occur. And by the way, and I'm not being facetious about theoretically, but I am saying that there are international agreements that should be done. But we can't say that it's always going to be followed. Dave, I don't know if you have more to add to that. I got a little carried away there.
Yeah, no, that's a whole other topic. There is ISPM 15.
Yeah.
It's our international phytosanitary
Yeah.
standards, and it's supposed to be done. Sometimes it is not done. There may be issues with certain countries or shippers faking the certification stamps, or maybe sometimes it just doesn't take. I know there's been times when it's been done appropriately and stuff still comes out. It's not, yes, there are issues, but stuff happens. But yes,
Yeah.
there are standards in place to try to address that.
Well, at the end of the day, and again, the emphasis on our presentation today is Asian longhorn beetle. When it's popped up, it has been a complete surprise. There's no other way of putting it. It's been, Dave didn't wake up, one morning and I'm going to drive down there and see this beetle. It's been a surprise, but it shouldn't be a surprise for any of us. It was a complete shock that this beetle was 25, 30 miles from my home. But we should not approach it that way. I actually do caution people this direction to say, all right, there's always a chance that it will get shipped here. There's also a chance it's already here. As Dave pointed out, we don't know how old the infestation is in South Carolina, but there's always a chance it's already here. And to some degree, when I teach this to arborists here in Ohio, I just say, look, you almost need to approach this assuming that it's here. And why I say it that way is because it means that it's all up to us to have the sharp eyes to be on the lookout for this. Now, if we don't find it, that's to the good. But if we assume, then that means that we are going to be looking for it. If we assume it isn't, we're going to walk past trees without a second look. I'll get off my soapbox. I'm sorry, Dave. You should
are
knock
on your
me off that.
soapbox, Joe.
I was on my
This is
soapbox.
Rachel again. I want to add to that, and I don't think that you mentioned this, but if you did, it's worth repeating. USDA has declared August as tree check month for Asian longhorn beetle. And, it's my pest that I love most with the First Detector program, I'm ashamed to admit, but I know how terrible it is, but this is my favorite one to cover. And I cover it very regularly with our, in the First Detector program. As we've seen with South Carolina and any of the places where it's showed up, it really can show up anywhere. And, all it takes is, 10 minutes and just, examine your trees. I went to the infestation or the quarantine area on Long Island, and I looked at infested trees. They're really, really hard to find, evidence of them sometimes. So it doesn't hurt just every year, when you're out and around trees, just, look at them and be aware. One other thing that I will mention, for those of you who are signed up to receive the First Detector newsletter, it will be the pest that we feature in the next issue for the scouting report. And I timed that just to coincide with August being tree check month. So it never hurts to just keep your eyes, keep on the lookout for it.
Well, okay, this has been, Rachel, I really do want to thank you for hosting and putting this together. I think the timing is perfect given that the adults are going go guns right now. So, and I really do want to thank all the participants because it's something that, that we all want to continue to increase awareness. And a special thanks to Dave Cole, I guess I want to publicly welcome him to the ALB club, right, Dave?
Thanks.
One more question did come in, Joe, about Norway maple, and if you want to just respond to that one.
That's a funny question. Not funny, haha, but okay. So yes, they will go after Norways. As a matter of fact, if you read the literature in those poplar plantations, those non-native poplar plantations, the poplars are often used for pallets, by the way. Very, very fine, as we all know, very fine-grained wood, very fast-growing. Norways are actually used in China as trap trees, or they were. I don't know if they still are, but they were used as trap trees. So what the plantation people would do would be they'd plant Norways, and that would draw the beetles to the Norways, you know, and they wouldn't be so much in the poplars, and then they'd take down the Norways and destroy them. I don't know how effective that was. The paper that I read, they didn't have a good, you know, quantifying number in terms of, okay, how much of a reduction of the population, but yes, Norways. And my understanding is also in Asia, there were some other non-native maples that we don't typically see quite as much that they'll also go after. They really do seem to love Acer. So that's a good question.
All right, folks, it's your last chance to get a question in before we wrap up. So if you have something you've been sitting on all this time, do so now. I'll start my wrap-up speech and give people an extra minute to do that. Thank you so much, Joe, for your time today and your expertise. Special thanks also to you, David, for joining us and sharing what's going on in South Carolina. I'm disappointed to hear that it's been found there, and I hope that things, you know, go as well as they can for you down there.
Thanks.
Next week, for those of you who've been following this webinar series all along, we will have Alan Wyndham from the University of Tennessee talking to us about two invasive pathogens, thousand cankers disease and laurel wilt. So be sure to join us next Wednesday for a talk comparing those two diseases. And I think that's it. I have some comments, but I don't see. Let's see. So Sharon is asking if there's a site with permissions to use slides of symptoms to watch for. I think that Joe has a lot of information. He puts out a weekly, I don't know if it's weekly blog, and there's a lot of information on the First Detector site as well in terms of resources on both ALB and EAB for symptoms to watch for.
Yeah, Sharon, get in touch with me. Obviously, that's what we're here for, the extension. So, you know, just get in touch with me, and I can help however you need my help.
Great. Well, again, gentlemen, thanks so much for a wonderful presentation. I do love the way, Joe, you've presented this. One last plug for First Detector. Joe has an incredibly well done presentation on our First Detector training site, which is how I came to invite him to do this talk, because he compares Asian longhorn beetle and emerald ash borer there. So if you want to review, this is being recorded, but you can also do our e-learning course on First Detector or download his scripted presentations on ALB. So, all right, everybody, thanks so much for joining us today, and hopefully we'll see you again next week.
Thank you, Rachel.
Thanks, Rachel. Thanks, everybody.
Thanks, everyone. Bye-bye.
Bye now.